Consulting. Have you noticed that literally everyone works in consulting nowadays? Do you have friends who are consultants? Are you a consultant? It wouldn't be surprising, as the consulting industry has grown by over 900% in the last 25 years. To compare, the global economy only grew by around 218% in that same period. And I find it quite alarming that the sector of workers who regularly use words like stakeholder is growing 5 times faster as the sector where the normal speaking people work. This is a video about the epic rise of the consulting industry. And it's part 2 of my consulting series, a series where I explain why the consulting industry is an absolute scam. In part 1, I explained that consultants aren't real experts. It's linked down below so you can go watch it after this video, in which I'll go into the scammy history of consulting and explain how the hell this industry got so fucking big. Like so many of us, I was a so-called consultant too. I lived day in and day out doing my fair share of the PowerPointing, Exceling and stakeholding. When I realised that consultants aren't actual experts but are usually just recent uni grads who got really good at PowerPoint, I started getting obsessed with reading about what else is fishy in this industry. And who would have guessed it? There's a lot. So I quit my consulting job. Of course, now I had all this free time, so as one would naturally do, instead of searching for a new job, I sunk into reading everything about the history of consulting. I got so obsessed that the only reasonable way to cope with it was to make a YouTube video to answer the question, why the hell the global economy is in need of so much consulting? So let's get into consulting history 101. We can all agree consulting is a relatively new profession. We have not really heard of farmer consultants in the Middle Ages who advised shepherds on how to run their sheep herds or making smith and sword making businesses more profitable. So when did this rise of consulting, everyone and everything start? Let's jump to the 1870s, a time where consultant wasn't a profession yet. The Second Industrial Revolution was a time when advances in steel production, electricity and petroleum caused a series of innovations that absolutely changed society. That is when companies like General Electric and Standard Oil started to employ expert engineers on short-term contracts. The big difference to consulting nowadays was that these consultants were actual experts in their field and not some random business school grads with a bachelor's degree in management from some supposedly elite uni called a target uni amongst consultants. After some time, some of these expert engineers grouped together and started their own expert engineering consulting firms, like for example, Arthur D. Little, who was a chemist from MIT who founded his firm in 1909. Which today is a well-known consulting firm, and they even cite on their website that they are the world's first management consulting firm. But expert engineers grouping together wasn't the only development propelling management consulting into the $1 trillion industry it is today. Because, quite frankly, that wouldn't even be possible because there's not enough expert engineers. The epic rise of consulting can mostly be explained by the rise of the vague and fuzzy concept of management advice. In 1911, Frederick Taylor published his infamous essay, The Principles of Scientific Management. Taylor's idea was that there is one right way to do things when organizing manufacturing work. The one right way would be the most efficient and cost-effective way of performing a task. This meant the standardization of work processes, breaking down complex tasks into simpler, standardized and repetitive actions, as well as measuring time and efficiency of workers to squeeze the most productivity out of them. Scientific management became very influential across the manufacturing industry. It treated workers less as human laborers and more as resources of the factory. Sounds like an absolutely exciting working environment that was designed here. Executives at the time thought so too, because scientific management spread like wildfire. Also, largely because it spawned a torrent of management consultants promoting it far and wide. The study of management went on to overtake universities. I mean, the concept of studying business administration or management is pretty new. Also, no offense to anyone actually going to uni for that, but you might as well have studied soft skills. Another factor contributing to the exponential growth of management consulting was regulatory changes and the rise of cost accounting. Cost accounting is a form of managerial accounting process that tracks and analyzes the costs of producing goods or services to better manage expenses and make a company more profitable. In short, it's just slashing unnecessary costs. One of the earliest adopters and proponents of cost accounting was James O. McKinsey. Having been a professor of accounting at the University of Chicago, he went on to found McKinsey & Company in 1925. McKinsey & Company is considered to be the most prestigious consultancy nowadays. And I know it sounds hard to believe, but the people working there probably say the word stakeholder even more often than people in other consultancies. McKinsey has also been involved in quite a lot of scandals that I'll get to in this video and in the next videos. Because the deeper I get into this whole consulting story, the more stuff just pops up. But essentially, McKinsey grew by giving advice to companies that most of the time involved laying off people to make the company more profitable in the short term and bump up the stock price. One of the earliest examples of this was the department store chain Marshall Field & Company. McKinsey's advice involved curbing labour unions once and for all, as well as cut. In the end, 1,200 employees were fired, something that went on to be known as McKinsey's Purge. Cool. James O. McKinsey's spirit of cutting unnecessary costs remains company philosophy until today. Like when McKinsey was hired to implement a transformational business plan called the Carnegie Way at US Steel in 2013. The consulting company recommended cutting expenses at the price of safety, as Walt, Bogdanich and Michael Forsythe wrote in their book When McKinsey Comes to Town. The workers said that the Carnegie Way plan jeopardized their safety, as McKinsey had no experience running a steel mill or what it takes to protect workers from harm. Especially the maintenance workers were hit hard. Dozens of them were laid off. Their warning proved prophetic when 2 workers died from electrocution. The same thing happened at Disneyland. In 1997, McKinsey presented the Disney CEO Paul Pressler with a report called Transforming Maintenance, Defining the Disneyland Standard. Using terms like cost avoidance, McKinsey recommended cutting back on maintenance, eliminating jobs, paying some people less, and hiring outsourcing contractors. This led to several deaths and severe injuries at Disneyland. And those are just the small scandals. But before I get into the big ones, let's continue a walk on the timeline of consulting history. How post-war capitalism shaped the consulting industry. During World War II, management consultants were increasingly hired by the US government across various sectors, leading to the growth of consulting contracts in both European and American governments. Other developments included the globalization and with it the merging and re-merging of accounting firms, so that by 1996, 90% of the revenues were coming from the Big Six accountancies, which were the forerunners of the Big Four, which I'll get to in a minute, and as I mentioned in my last video, are one of the biggest players in the consulting economy. Also, the Big Six realised that consulting is a lot more lucrative than accounting, so they shifted their focus to secure more and more of the consulting contracts, resulting in the main revenues now mostly coming from consulting and not from accounting. Neoliberalism and financialization. Neoliberalism refers to the political agenda behind market-oriented reform policies. It's all about deregulating capital markets, as well as lowering trade barriers and reducing the state's influence in the economy through privatization and austerity. Austerity means reducing public expenditure like social welfare. Neoliberal policies usually seek to increase the role of the private sector in the economy and society and decrease the role of government, as neoliberals believe that the invisible hand of the market will just sort it out all for the best. Early neoliberalism's main characters were Margaret Thatcher, who was elected to be the UK's Prime Minister in 1979, and Ronald Reagan, who became the President of the United States in 1980. And being really big fans of the free market and a lean government, and both being their country's leaders, seemed to be a bonding experience for them, so they became besties. Also, fun fact, although Thatcher and Reagan slashed spending on the so-called welfare state, their neoliberal policies did not end up reducing state expenditure. Also, let me know in the comments if you want a video about neoliberalism, because there's loads more to explore about this topic, and I'd absolutely love to make a video explaining how Nixon detached the dollar from the gold standard to fund the Vietnam War fighting communism. Ending the Bretton Woods Agreement by detaching the dollar from the gold standard is a major factor playing in today's inequality. So yeah, leave a comment about that. While you're at it, smash the subscribe and the like button so this video reaches more people and more people get to hear about the consulting industry being a scam. Anyways, back to how neoliberalism helped the consulting industry explode. The neoliberal era is marked by globalization and the financialization of markets. Financialization means that the finance sector gets more and more important relative to the overall economy, and also that all kinds of jazzy financial products like derivatives and stuff like that are hitting the shelves. Anyways, financialization also makes it easier to take on debt and make investments. And that's how all the big companies started buying smaller companies, like the accounting companies that got really big through buying up smaller accountancies in all the corners of the world. That made it really easy for them to sell multinational strategies to big corporations. Also, it's pretty crazy how financialization has led to massive amounts of debt and the ever-growing derivative market, which is a monster in itself. Let me know if you want a video about that. Anyways, neoliberalism was exactly what was needed for government spending on management consulting to explode. When Margaret Thatcher was elected in the UK in 1979, the government was spending around $6 million on consulting services annually. When Margaret Thatcher stepped down 11 years later, the amount was more than 40 times greater at £246 million. Under Reagan, the consulting industry also went absolutely bananas and consultants were consulting on the wildest things. For example, they helped draft policies on when the government should hire consultants. Unsurprisingly, the consultants came to the conclusion pretty often that government should outsource even more work to them. How the Big Six became the Big Four. In the late 1990s, the Big Six became the Big Five because Pricewaterhouse merged with Coopers & Lybrand to form PricewaterhouseCoopers, known as PwC today. But the most scandalous development that led to the Big Five becoming the Big Four was the collapse of Enron. This is one of my favourite corporate scam stories ever, and there's also an epic movie about it that I very much recommend watching. Enron was an energy and commodity trading company that collapsed in 2001. All of the frauds started happening when Jeff Skilling switched from being a consultant at McKinsey and only consulting Enron to becoming its CEO and running the company with the help of his McKinsey buddies, who received $10 million in consulting fees from Enron every year. Enron successfully lobbied for a deregulation of the California electricity market, and Jeff Skilling created an increasingly competitive environment to reach the highest possible share price for Enron. This included Enron traders creating artificial power shortages so that the price would go up. But Skilling also involved some very creative accounting in the running of his business, including the use of shell companies to cover up losses from investors and mark-to-market accounting. It all ended when their accounting fraud caught up to them, and Enron collapsed. And so did their accounting firm, Arthur Andersen, who had been part of the Big Five. So now there was only the Big Four left. Also, fun side note, Arthur Andersen had spun out its consulting arm, Accenture, before their accounting fraud, which is why the consulting firm Accenture is still among us. But why are executives so obsessed with pumping up the share price as quickly as possible anyways? Executive compensation and the importance of the stock price. CEOs don't usually get a salary. They usually get a mixture of fixed salary and variable performance-based bonuses like cash, shares, or call options on the company stock, which means that it's especially lucrative for CEOs to bump up the share price as fast as possible instead of making long-term investments. And one of the fastest ways to meet Wall Street's expectations is through staff reductions. Enron is a great example of how executives will do anything for a higher stock price. They had a rank or yank policy, which meant that they would fire the 20% worst performing employees every year. This is how Enron executives made sure the share price remained sky high. And funnily enough, in the book When McKinsey Comes to Town, there's a section about how McKinsey viewed compensation and how it went at Enron. Since McKinsey won't discuss executive compensation at specific companies, its thinking on the matter can be gleaned in part by examining the pay structure at Enron, the failed energy company. Again and again, the firm held out Enron as a model of the modern successful corporation. It was run by a former McKinsey partner, Jeff Skilling, with help from McKinsey consultants, one of whom even sat in on board meetings. According to Forbes, Enron's top 5 executives took in nearly $300 million in 1 year alone, and more than $500 million over a 5-year span, ending in 2000. Most of it from cashing out stock options. Enron eventually collapsed amid allegations of fraud, resulting in the loss of thousands of jobs. McKinsey was not charged with any wrongdoing. But CEO compensation isn't the only thing tied to a stock price. When US Steel employed McKinsey, their compensation was also tied to the US Steel stock price. McKinsey's compensation was tied partly to the steelmaker's financial performance, raising questions about the firm's motive in recommending cuts in expenses, which in the end cost the lives of some of the US steel workers. Anyways, there's loads more scammy stuff, like the involvement of consulting firms and consulting banks like Lehman Brothers ahead of the financial crisis of 2008. Also, 200,000 people have died from overdoses in the opioid crisis, and McKinsey, who is facing criminal charges for their advice to pharma companies, had to cough up $573 million in a recent settlement with US state attorneys. And the best thing is that part of the settlement is an online document repository that's available to the public that entails all the work and emails McKinsey did for opioid firms. It's full of fun emails like this one, in which Martin Elling, a McKinsey partner, writes about eliminating all of the emails and documents relating to his opioid work. So, I will dig myself into that document repository in the coming weeks and tell you all about it. Also, I will go into ESG consulting, which is the latest trends of the consultancies and another huge problem. It's basically that consultancies are now offering sustainability consulting, helping draft sustainability regulations, but at the same time working for the oil and gas giants on how to become more profitable. In the end, society is paying the price twofold. On the one hand, with not being able to stop climate change, and on the other, with our tax money. I'll get into all of that in the next part of this series, so you can see for yourself how the only sustainable thing about consulting is how they recycle their PowerPoint slides from client to client. So make sure to subscribe. Alright, bye!